Constitutions of the Order of St. Augustine, Chapter 4, Consecration to God, Evangelical Poverty and the Sharing of Goods. Number 64. Our Holy Father Augustine, in commanding us to call nothing our own, but to let everything be ours in common, intended to renew the ideal of the sharing of goods that existed among the early Christians. He saw in this sharing a particularly suitable way to attain Christian love by living in a fraternal community in which all would be intent upon God in oneness of mind and heart. It is this communion of goods, so deeply cherished by Augustine, that makes our practice of poverty distinctive, and evangelical poverty in the footsteps of the poor Christ. Following the poor Christ, we must never lose sight that his poverty was not merely a kind of economic condition, but rather it is rooted in the mystery of his profound self-emptying. Our poverty, therefore, should not be reduced to a mere giving up of temporal goods, but of all that is redolent of pride, that is vanity, personal honors, and the like. It follows that our poverty is of little worth unless it is joined with humility of mind and heart. 65. Poverty not only requires a sharing of all goods with our brothers, keeping nothing as our own, but demands also that we have hearts free from the desire for material things. Therefore, the rule recommends simplicity of life with regard to all material goods, with the result that we are less encumbered in dedicating ourselves to the service of our neighbor, especially the poor. It is better to want a little than to have too much. This simplicity will better equip us in our efforts to realize a more just society. 66. Through this sharing of goods, we give evidence that we are steeped in that love, according to which we no longer seek what is our own, but rather the common good, and prefer what is of advantage to the many before our own interests. Thus, the greatest wealth of the Augustinian community is ever that vast and extremely rich estate common to all, which is God. Consequently, we must earnestly cultivate poverty and, where possible and appropriate, express it in forms that are new and more suited to the understanding of today's society, as well as particular cultures. It is not sufficient that we depend on the permission of the superior in the use of goods. Rather, we must be poor both in spirit and in fact, storing up our treasure in heaven. 67. It is the duty of the community to provide for the friars whatever is necessary and fitting, according to the norms of the house and the province. But the accumulation and possession of money, as though it were one's own, is entirely contrary to the vow of poverty and to the nature of the common life. Any payment received for work, therefore, and any gifts, including things other than money, truly belong to the community, and are not to be considered personal, even when personal use of them is granted in particular cases. 68. The friars, therefore, as sincere lovers of poverty, should examine their consciences to see whether or not they possess anything as their own. In the things that they have for their use, all should practice simplicity and moderation, shunning abuses and useless expenditures. Superiors and officials should willingly and courteously provide for each one, due consideration being made for different regions, as well as for the age and condition of the friars. They should also be concerned to create an attractive atmosphere in the house so as to make it pleasant to live there and to encourage brotherhood. 69. Because exaggerated economic inequalities arouse scandal where great wealth and destitution, abundance and famine exist side by side in the same society, the ideal of evangelical poverty impels us all the more and under a stricter obligation to bear witness to the world of the poor Christ against the unbridled lust for riches, and to faithfully observe the obligations of poverty in keeping with the nature of our order, the prescriptions of the rule, and the example of our Holy Father Augustine. Our spirituality of communion offers the world a prophetic voice in the face of these inequalities. 70. Mindful of the words of the Apostle, if anyone does not wish to work, let him not eat, and, as men striving to be poor, we cannot excuse ourselves from work. Rather, we must generously fulfill our duties, especially those of an apostolic nature. We do this, however, not for the sake of material gain, but so that we may humbly submit ourselves to the common law of labor in imitation of Christ, who did not come to be served, but to serve. Besides this, our sense of fraternity demands that all of us help and serve one another mutually, urged on by a like responsibility and concern for our brothers. 71. The Church and humankind expect of us a witness to poverty which is both individual and collective. Consequently, the friars, their houses, and provinces should avoid any appearance of excessive wealth. They should promote projects among the poor, especially such as in the missions, parishes, and in social works, so that we may recognize the poor Christ in his needy ones and strive to serve him. Moreover, because we must preach social justice above all by example, all those who are employed by us should receive a just and generous wage. Finally, it is in keeping with the Augustinian fraternal spirit that communities and provinces should share their resources with one another, so that those who are better supplied help those who suffer need. 72. Superiors should see to it that friars in solemn vows make a civilly valid document in which they clearly state that as a religious in solemn vows they cannot be the owners of any temporal goods or rights, and that any such goods which they have under any title belong to the order, the province, or the house, and upon death must revert to the community. Preferential option for the poor. St. Augustine tells us that he was profoundly moved by his reading of Matthew 25, verses 31 through 46. I was hungry, and you gave me to eat. Because of this, he affirmed that what we give to the poor, we give to Christ, and what we withhold from the poor, we withhold from Christ. Thus, after the example of St. Augustine, we are obliged to give a coherent and prophetic witness to the preferential option for the poor, and make a serious effort to imitate Christ, showing that we are in solidarity with those who are materially poor and who must live on the margins of society. This prophetic option requires that we examine our way of life and make practical decisions regarding the use of our material goods in order to clearly manifest our concrete solidarity with the victims of that injustice that arises from the social structures of sin. This preferential option for the poor, and the decisions which it inspires in us, cannot but embrace the immense multitudes of the hungry, the needy, the homeless, those without medical care, and, above all, those without hope of a better future. We cannot ignore the existence of these realities. To do so would mean that we become like the rich man who pretended not to know the beggar Lazarus lying every day at his gate.